Haruto Amikawa is a clumsy 20-year-old loser who was reincarnated into the body of a poor orphan child. Surprisingly, despite his accident and reincarnation into another world, he manages to become the most powerful magician in it and obtain powers equivalent to those of a god. We see our protagonist on a bus in Tokyo, recalling moments from his past. Years ago, due to his parents' divorce and subsequent move, he had to part ways with Miharu Ayase, his childhood friend. He promised her that he would find her again when they were older, to marry her and protect her even if it cost him his life. Years had passed since that memory, and now Haruto, still on the bus, became distracted when he noticed a little girl staring at him intently. However, in a matter of seconds, the bus lost control and ended up in a terrible accident, being struck by a train. Haruto remembered the words he had said to his childhood friend, only to awaken, confused, in the body of a boy named Rio. Now he was in an old house in the kingdom of Beltram, in the year 991. Dazed, the memories of the protagonist's past life and that of this world began to blend. But his confusion was interrupted by a group of men who apparently lived in that house. One of them told Rio that he thought by now the fever would have killed him. Then he instructed one of his companions to carefully place a sack he was carrying on the floor. Afterwards, the group sat down to eat, which made Rio feel hungry. But the men just shooed him away, saying he stank. Rio left the house and went to search for berries, while remembering the life of Haruto Amikawa, a boy who lived in Japan and attended university. He also remembered that Haruto died in a traffic accident, but he wasn't even sure what that meant. After all, those are things that don't exist in the world he now inhabits. He interrupted himself, affirming that he is Rio, a boy who lives in a filthy slum to one day avenge his mother. Shortly after, a group of girls accompanied by a woman rudely asked him if he had seen a girl his age with purple hair. Rio said no, to which one of them approached him and told her companions that he wouldn't answer if they asked like that. She then addressed him and introduced herself as Celia Claire, asking him kindly if he knew anything about the mentioned girl. Rio, calmer now, reiterated that he didn't know anything, so Celia asked him about the lower quarter. But Rio advised her not to go there, as it's a dangerous place, especially for a girl dressed so elegantly. He mentioned that people there usually dress in rags. Therefore, the woman in the group, Vanessa, told Celia they would come back to search after changing clothes. She also told her to check for magic nearby, just to be sure. After casting a spell, Celia scanned the area. She was surprised to see that Rio emitted a significant amount of mana, indicating he had the potential to use magic. Rio was surprised to see the blue aura he emitted, while Celia confirmed that there were no other mana sources nearby. She gave Rio a bag of silver coins, then thanked him for the information and left with her companions. Upon seeing so many silver coins, Rio ran back home, only to be attacked as soon as he entered. He noticed that all the men who lived there had been murdered by the guy in the mask, who threatened him with a knife. Before being attacked again, time stops and he hears a voice calling him Haruto, telling him they have no time. Rio sees a girl with long floating hair, who tells him she will teach him the odd and how to use his mana. She explains that he just needs to memorize that sensation, sharpen his senses, and use the light surrounding him to become stronger. The vision breaks and time resumes. Rio manages to dodge the attack and counter with a blow. Combining Haruto's strength and using Rio's new ability, the protagonist manages to fight until he knocks out the masked man. After it's all over, he notices that the sack the men left on the floor earlier started moving. Unraveling it, as he suspected, it was the purple-haired girl he had heard about. Scared, the girl asks him to take her to the castle, saying her father will reward him if he helps her. After seeing one of the corpses in the house, the girl screams and faints. Rio decides to carry her and take her to the castle. But to his dismay, he encounters the group that was previously searching for her, misunderstanding the situation. They take Rio to the castle to explain what happened, while Flora Beltram, the princess who was kidnapped, recovers. Meanwhile, the house where the incident occurred is investigated, and they find someone still alive. Alfred Emerl, the king's sword, orders him to be arrested, as he could be an accomplice to the kidnapping. However, a hooded man watching from the crowd shatters a gem, causing the suspect to die immediately. Back at the castle, the deputy captain of the royal guard ignores orders for a polite interrogation, wanting Rio to admit he was involved in the kidnapping of the second princess. The deputy captain hits him multiple times, but despite this, Rio continues to deny it, saying he has nothing to do with it. Some time later, Princess Flora wakes up and clarifies the situation, asking to see Rio. Vanessa and Celia head to the interrogation room to find Rio terribly injured. Vanessa reprimands the deputy captain for ordering a peaceful interrogation, but he already knew. After clarifying that Rio is free of suspicion, they release him and Celia heals him with magic. Later, Rio wakes up in a room in the royal palace, with Celia apologizing for everything that happened. Celia informs him that he will be granted an audience with the king to thank him in person. Therefore, Rio asks her to teach him the protocols for addressing the king, to which Celia agrees without hesitation. Shortly after dressing appropriately for the occasion, Rio heads to the audience, where the king thanks him for saving his daughter. He also informs him that he will ensure he attends the Royal Academy of Beltram as a scholarship student. Days later, Rio begins studying at the academy, where Celia would be responsible for teaching him to read. However, he is not very well received due to his background and the fact that most students are of royal or noble descent. Despite this, in a short time, with the help of Celia and the knowledge he already has from Haruto's university studies, Rio manages to excel at the academy. He not only excels in knowledge but also in strength, as Haruto used to practice kendo constantly. Therefore, Rio manages to surprise his swordmaster with his fighting stance, and he tells him he has the potential to be a knight. However, Rio says he's not interested in being a knight, further surprising his master and his peers. Days pass, and Rio doesn't stop studying. After the exams, as he leaves the academy and sees the student environment, he remembers Miharu again, Haruto Amikawa's childhood friend, who parted ways with him when Haruto's parents divorced. Haruto finally saw her again in high school, years later, but he only saw her that day, and she didn't return to school after that, as if she had disappeared. Rio snaps out of his thoughts, saying it doesn't matter as Haruto Amikawa is dead. He repeats to himself that he is now Rio, determined to live that life with strength and tenacity. The next day, the exam results are published, causing a stir among the students. Apparently, Rio had tied for first place with Princess Christina Beltram. Alphonse Rodin, not happy with this, confronts Rio, accusing him of cheating. However, Rona Fontaine interrupts, saying that envy is not fitting of a knight, and he has no evidence of his accusations. Celia arrives to clarify that she witnessed Rio's score as a result of his own effort, to which Alphonse becomes even angrier and leaves. Rio tries to thank Christina and Rona for defending him, but they ignore him, saying they didn't do it for him. Shortly after, Celia tells Rio that she's worried about the criticisms and offensive comments from the students. However, he tells her he'll be fine as long as she's his friend, as she would always be willing to help him when he needs it. Time passes, and now 5 years later, in the year 996, the students are lined up, awaiting the announcement of the tournament participants, which will be held jointly with the kingdom's knights. The master proceeds to name 3 students from different years, among them Alphonse Rodin and Rio. Alphonse doesn't hesitate to complain upon hearing Rio's name, saying it's unacceptable for someone of his kind to participate in the tournament with the knights. Furthermore, Rio cannot use magic, and it would be a total disgrace. However, the master tells him it's already decided and he won't accept complaints. Celia and Rio maintain their habit of drinking tea and conversing frequently, only now Rio is taller than her. Celia asks him about his plans after graduation, and Rio tells her he plans to travel to his parents' homeland, Yagumo, a place his mother promised to take him before she died, where his grandparents live. Days later, the tournaments between the knights and the academy students begin. The first participant is Rio, who to his surprise has to face Charles Arbo, the member of the royal guard who humiliated and tortured him when he first arrived at the palace. Alfred Emerl, the tournament referee, is surprised to see Rio's unusual stance and the fact that he doesn't even use a shield. Despite this, he announces the start of the duel. Charles rushes at Rio in fury, remembering that 5 years ago he was demoted because of him. Rio calmly blocks the attacks, also recalling the humiliation from 5 years ago. Celia is surprised to see that Charles is fighting seriously, even though it's against a student. However, shortly after, Rio manages to win the duel with one move, leaving Charles disarmed. Charles tries to make excuses, saying he would fight seriously this time, but Alfred rebukes him, making him accept defeat. Later that day, Charles complains about his failure, telling the Proxian Empire ambassador about Rio. The ambassador asks about him, and Charles tells him that 5 years ago he interrogated him as a suspect in the kidnapping of Princess Flora. The ambassador then remembers the day he was among the crowd, back then, ensuring that no witnesses remained alive. The next day, Celia was waiting for Rio to celebrate his victory, but when she sees him, she notices he's heading to an unusual place, so she decides to follow him. Seeing where he's going, she hides behind a tree and watches as a girl hands him a love letter, causing Celia to awaken new feelings. Despite this, days pass, and she continues teaching at the academy as usual. All the students learn magic, assuming that Rio is the only one who can't use it. What they don't know is that Rio can use another kind of magic, but in a non-traditional way, which he keeps hidden. While the students usually use formulas, Rio merely reproduces spells by imitating the flow of magic. After the magic control class ends, the students prepare for an outdoor exercise, where they have to traverse a mountain full of monsters. Stuart Huguenot, who harbors a great disdain for Rio, tells him that despite being a burden who can't use magic, he has the perfect job for him. That would be carrying everyone's luggage during the exercise. Rio, as always, accepts without a problem, remaining calm. Princess Flora, who has long witnessed the unjust treatment Rio receives, asks if she can help him. Rio thanks her for her consideration but politely declines her offer, so Flora has no choice but to continue walking with the group, still worried about Rio. Flora tries to mention it to her sister Christina, but she is interrupted by the appearance of some goblins. The group goes on alert, but Alphonse calms the team, saying the goblins aren't that strong. Thus, in a short time, they manage to deal with each one. Stuart boasts about how easy it was and says they need monsters that are up to their level. Alphonse agrees, saying he was a great help, unlike Rio, who did nothing and instead was distracted. What they don't know is that Rio got distracted by noticing something in the forest, suspecting something. Still, he apologizes and rejoins the group. Meanwhile, the Proxian Empire ambassador hides among the trees, surprised to see that Rio sensed his presence and almost discovered him. Seeing how exceptional Rio is, he decides to continue testing him to discover his true abilities. The group of students continues along the route and manages to exit the forest. However, they come across a cliff. The students don't know what to do in such an unexpected situation, and Christina tells Alphonse that she awaits his instructions since he is the commander. Alphonse has no idea what to do, but before saying anything, they are unexpectedly attacked by orcs. The students go on guard, dodging the enemy's spears, but one of them manages to graze Stuart's leg. He reacts poorly to this, exclaiming in pain and stumbling into one of his companions, who pushes him away. However, as he is pushed, Stuart collides with Princess Flora, causing her to fall off the cliff. Rio reacts immediately, leaping off the cliff and catching her, then using his magic to send her back up, while he falls into the forest. He stays in the forest, wondering if the students would suspect later when they see that he didn't sustain any injuries, because he wouldn't know how to explain his abilities, as he doesn't even know what it is. He just knows it's not magic or a spell. His thoughts are interrupted by the distant arguing of the students. After managing to defeat the orcs, they argue about finding the culprit who pushed Princess Flora. Stuart, completely defensive, claims that someone else is to blame, only to end up saying that Rio is the culprit, asserting that being so scared by the orcs, Rio pushed him even while injured, causing him to collide with Princess Flora. Alphonse tries to cover up Stuart's lie, saying that Rio then saved her out of fear of being accused of killing her. Princess Flora tries to intervene, clarifying that's not what happened. However, Rio, who was listening more closely, knew that things were getting out of control. Stuart managed to get the other students to support him, lying and saying they were also witnesses to his testimony. After seeing that, Rio knows he can't go back, and he won't be able to graduate from the academy, as he had planned. The students decide to leave. However, Princess Flora says she won't leave without finding Rio first. Christina tells her to calm down and that they would send a rescue team later, but she is interrupted by the roar of a beast much larger than the orcs, an armed minotaur, much stronger than anything they've faced before. Seeing that no attack harms it, the students scatter, trying to flee. Princess Flora stays behind, healing an injured student who is unconscious, so the minotaur heads toward her and tries to attack. But Rio steps in, blocking the attack and cutting off one of the Minotaur's arms. The princess is surprised and relieved to see Rio is okay, but he tells Flora to flee with the student. After Flora moves away, she watches in amazement as Rio fights against the Minotaur. Rio attacks, not entirely understanding why he had jumped to help her again, yet he focuses and finally manages to defeat the Minotaur. After this, he runs off, while the man responsible for all these trials watches from the air, thoroughly entertained. He wonders if Rio, with his dark hair, could be a descendant of someone from Yagumo, as that would explain why he could use spiritual magic so exceptionally. Later that day, Celia hears about what happened and learns that Rio disappeared, despite Princess Flora defending him. Due to the Duke of Huguenot's persuasions, the Academy had no choice but to blame Rio. At night, Rio secretly visits Celia, as she was the only person he wanted to say goodbye to. Celia asks him if he will be leaving for Yagumo, which Rio confirms, saying he would send her letters frequently, using a nickname. Celia asks what nickname he would use, to which Rio responds that he will write using the name Haruto. After a farewell hug, Rio finally leaves the academy, leaving Celia crying as she remembers the day she met him. Meanwhile, somewhere in the dungeons of the palace, Charles Arbo was indicating his next target to Latifa, a small girl trained to be an assassin. Charles hands her a garment of Rio's and describes his appearance, instructing her that as soon as she sees him, she must end his life. 3 days later, Latifa stealthily pursues Rio in the Garlark Market, located in the city of Amand. He senses her presence and becomes alert, but thanks to Latifa's hiding skills, Rio fails to see her and decides to ignore it. Shortly afterward, he discovers a noodle stand, to his surprise, as it's a food he had never seen in that world. The owner of the noodle stand explains that it's an invention of the ruler of the city Amand, Lyslot Kresha. Rio decides to buy a large quantity of noodles for his journey, so he goes to the Rika Merchant Guild. After obtaining everything he needs, he finally sets off on his long journey, and after a while of walking, he finds an unconscious girl on the road. He tries to help her, but as he approaches, she throws a poison dart at him and leaps to attack him, revealing herself to be Latifa. Rio quickly dodges, with his vision somewhat blurry. He leaves his luggage on the ground and stops the poison with his spiritual magic. Latifa continues to attack aggressively. However, in a short time, Rio manages to render her unconscious. Upon examining her more closely, he notices she wears a slave collar. Then he remembers reading in a book a way to release such a collar. So he tries it, and successfully removes it. Meanwhile, Latifa has nightmares about her time in the palace dungeons, where she woke up 5 years ago, with the memories of Suzune Endo, the girl who paid special attention to Haruto before the bus accident. After said accident, she woke up in Latifa's body and was tortured and trained by Stuart Huguenot during those 5 years. Upon waking from the nightmare, Rio informs her that he freed her from the collar, so she had no reason to follow orders or return to her master. Rio asks her some questions, confirming that the person who sent her works for Stuart. After this, Rio prepares to continue his journey, resigned to the fact that Latifa will follow him, as she didn't want to be alone. They travel together for days, and Rio realizes that Latifa comes from the same world as Haruto, just like him. He notices this because during one of her nightmares, Latifa mentions the name Tokyo in a murmur. Latifa, shortly afterward, also notices a resemblance between Rio and the boy she saw on the bus, whom she observed closely because he reminded her of her brother. Neither of them says anything about it. Rio allows Latifa to call him brother, as she accidentally called him that a couple of times, and he thought she must really miss him. Time passes, and they encounter a large forest, where in the distance there is a huge tree protected by magic. Rio repeatedly asks Latifa if she can see it, but she assures him that all she sees is a common forest. Both venture into that forest, where one night, Rio is attacked by a group of 4 half-human beings. Rio is blinded, so he can't see his attackers, but thanks to his spiritual magic, he manages to dodge their attacks. He tries to reason with them, which almost works until one of the girls sees Latifa sleeping in the tent. Thinking Rio is a kidnapper, the half-human girls take him by surprise and render him unconscious with an electric attack. After some time of being unconscious, Rio wakes up in an unknown place, chained up. Shortly after, Latifa rushes towards him, crying, followed by the 4 girls who had attacked him, who apologize and then remove Rio's chains. Ursula, a member of the Council of Elders, also appears, clarifying that it was all a misunderstanding. The next day, the Council of Elders formally apologizes to Rio, and as compensation for all the trouble, they allow him to ask for anything he wants. Rio asks to be allowed to stay in the village for a few days and to be taught how to improve in spiritual arts. The elders of the council gladly accept, and before the meeting ends, the spirit of the world tree, Dryas, appears, a girl with long green hair, who says she senses the presence of a spirit inside Rio. She asks Rio if he had ever made a pact, but he says he doesn't remember anything. Dryas explains that pacts with spirits are a problem for humans because doing so makes them lose the ability to use magic. Rio then tells her that he is unable to use traditional magic, so Dryas decides to investigate further. In a few seconds, Dryas notices a large amount of awe in Rio, but she is even more surprised to notice another completely different presence. She mentions that a humanoid spirit lives inside Rio, one that seemed to be asleep. This surprises the Council of Elders and confuses Rio, so Dryas explains that spirits that take human forms, like her, are of the second highest category or higher. She also explains that spirits of higher categories used to be known as the 6 Great Spirits, but they disappeared 1,000 years ago after the Divine Demonic War. Dryas tells the elders that the spirit sleeping inside Rio could be one of the 6 Great Spirits. Rio asks if there's any problem with it being of a higher category, to which Dryas responds that there isn't. But she tells him that the children of the village would surely make a great fuss, as she is only of the 2nd highest category, and they already treat her like a deity. The elders say they will have to reconsider how they address Rio, not knowing if they should call him Saint from now on. Rio seems confused, but they tell him not to worry, as they would simply start treating him even better. Later, Dryas takes him to the house where he would live with Latifa and 3 other girls from the village, who would help take care of her. Time passes, and Rio learns a lot about spiritual arts, also spending quality time with the villagers, who teach him many more things. A year has passed since Rio and Latifa have been living in the village, and the people celebrate the Festival of the Spirits, where Dryas bestows a blessed kiss upon Rio and Latifa, declaring Rio as a recognized ally and Latifa as a resident of the village. Later that day, the villagers continue to celebrate, and Rio tells Ursula that it was time to tell Latifa that he would soon be leaving. Meanwhile, once again, the ambassador of the Proxia Empire, Rius Wolf, takes action. Together with an apprentice of the Celestial Lions, he ventures into a cave to search for the egg of an unknown creature. According to Rius, this creature would help improve the military potential of the Celestial Lions. Shortly after, they travel to the forest, and Rius leaves the apprentice to guard the egg while he watches as the creatures approach to seek it out. Leaving his apprentice as bait, Rius heads to another cave, which is filled with many more eggs, and he starts to steal them without any hurry. Dryas notices reactions within the village barrier, so some female warriors decide to investigate. They notice suspicious odd reactions near the point where Rius left his apprentice, and upon approaching, they manage to see him, along with a griffin. The warriors approach and try to dialogue, but the frightened apprentice runs to his griffin and flees. Sarah, the leader of the group, gives permission to attack as the griffin heads towards the village. However, before it arrives, one of the creatures that Rius saw earlier chases after it, searching for the egg the apprentice is guarding. The warriors notice a flock of these creatures called wyverns, also pursuing the griffin. As Rius finishes stealing every last egg in the cave, he breaks a small red gem, causing the apprentice to die instantly. Lifeless, the apprentice drops the egg and falls into the forest, while the warriors prepare to battle against the wyverns. Latifa walks through the forest, angry as Rio had already told her that he would soon be leaving and that she couldn't go with him. Her anger is interrupted by the sound of something breaking nearby, which unfortunately turns out to be the wyvern egg that the apprentice dropped when he died. An enormous wyvern soon arrives, and upon seeing the broken egg, it becomes enraged and goes out of control, greatly frightening Latifa. Rio, observing the village evacuate after hearing an explanation of what's happening, hears Latifa's call in his mind, so he runs alarmed to find her. Alma, one of the warriors, arrives to save Latifa, however, she is not strong enough. Despite Alma telling her to flee, Latifa runs and taunts the beast, trying to distract it from reaching the village. However, shortly after, Latifa finds herself cornered, but just before being crushed by the wyvern, Rio arrives to save her. After leaving her in a safe place, he begins to attack the wyvern. Despite the beast's great strength, Rio manages to defeat it without using weapons, thanks to all he trained and learned during his year in the village. The other wyverns retreat after Rio defeats the largest one, and the rest of the warriors gather around him. Surprised to learn that Rio defeated that wyvern without assistance, they thank him for saving the village. The next day, Rio tells Latifa the reason he is heading to Yagumo, and she reconciles with him. Latifa confesses that she was actually reborn in that world, and that she used to be a human who lived in a place called Japan. Thinking Rio wouldn't believe anything she said, she's surprised when he tells her he went through the same thing. She asks him if he has any regrets from his past life, which makes Rio remember Miharu. But he tells her he swore to become stronger to survive in that world. Another reason why he wants to go to Yagumo. Latifa promises him that she will also become strong, to meet him again someday, and to live in that world without regrets. The day finally arrives, and Rio prepares to leave the village, with a mithril sword gifted by the dwarves. This sword is capable of absorbing spiritual arts and coating itself with them. He is also gifted with a sturdy garment made from the skin of the black wyvern that Rio defeated. From the elves, Rio receives secret remedies and elixirs, and from the beast folk, abundant food and drink. One of the elders also gifts him a valuable space-time storage device in the form of a bracelet, which would facilitate his journey. With this storage device, Ryo manages to store all his belongings within the bracelet. After having everything ready, Ryo bids farewell, asking them to take care of his sister Latifa, and not to hesitate to call him if they need help. 1 year later, after 2 weeks in Yagumo, Ryo finds no clues about his parents, even though everyone there also had black hair. He decides to speak with the village leader, Yuba, and tells her that he is looking for someone. Ryo explains that he came to her village because he was told that Yuba knew more people in the area. The leader invites him in, prepared for a long conversation. Ryo asks about his parents, Zen and Ayim. After telling him more about it, Ryo is surprised to learn that Yuba is Zen's mother. Yuba tells him that he did well to come to Yagumo, but there is something she doesn't know how to explain to him. After taking Ryo to his parents' grave, Yuba explains that they had their reasons for secretly leaving the country. Ryo asks what those reasons were, but Yuba says it's something she can't tell him yet. She then asks Ryo if he would be willing to stay in Yagumo until the moment she can tell him. Hiding his lineage from the rest of the village, Ryo decides to live in Yagumo for a while. After some time, he manages to get along with the villagers, surprising everyone with his advanced skills in spiritual arts. However, he also manages to stir up jealousy in Shin, one of the village boys, who says that all Ryo does is show off. Despite this, they continue to live together normally until one day Gon, the son of the neighboring village, arrives, asking for accommodation because his cart broke down during his journey. Shin becomes defensive, sensing his true intentions, and it turns out Gon shows blatant interest in Shin's sister, Seo, and also in Ruri, Yuba's granddaughter and Ryo's cousin. Before a fight breaks out, Yuba arrives and stops them, telling Gon that he could stay in a cabin on the outskirts, with the condition that he doesn't leave. Shin asks Yuba to let Seo stay in their house with Ruri, as she wouldn't feel safe alone in her own home. Yuba agrees to this without any problem and warns everyone not to let their guard down. Later that night, before Ruri and Seo go to sleep, Ryo gives them an amulet to place in a corner of their room, which the girls do and thank him with joy. Meanwhile, Gon talks with his companions in his cabin, revealing that deliberately damaging his cart was a success, and they could take as long as they want to fix it, then have fun in another way. The next day, Inspector Height Saga arrives with his assistants to inspect the village. The day goes well, without any issues, until night falls and Gon starts to act. While Ruri and Seo sleep, he enters their room and threatens to hit them if they make any noise. However, shortly after, thanks to the amulet in the corner of the room, Ryo arrives, effortlessly pushing away Gon's companions. Seeing Gon on top of Ruri, he somehow recalls his mother's murder, prompting Ryo to throw him out of the house. On the ground, Ryo approaches him and pins him down. Gon pleads for him to stop, but Ryo, almost in a trance, ignores him. He removes his foot, only to start repeatedly punching him in the face, getting covered in blood, while the girls watch in horror. This continues until Inspector Height steps out of the house due to the commotion, and asks Ryo to stop before he kills him, to which Ryo steps aside without saying a word. Yuba also steps out and sees the chaos. Height explains that apparently Gon attempted to attack Ruri and Seo. After Yuba and the girls go back into the house, Height starts healing Gon with magic, telling him he committed a very serious crime. Ryo, who still hasn't uttered a word, walks away, thinking that was the second time he really wanted to kill someone. He understands that as Ryo, he's had that feeling for a long time, but unwittingly, he's getting closer to Haruto Amikawa. The next morning, Height announces that a messenger from the kingdom will arrive the next day, and Gon will be arrested along with his companions. Ryo apologizes for the trouble he caused, but Yuba tells him he doesn't have to apologize, and instead thanks him, as well as Height and the girls. The next day, everyone heads to the royal capital of the kingdom of Karasuki to sell the surplus rice after the annual tax and rations. After several days, the group finally arrives at the royal capital, where Gon is arrested, and Shin thanks Ryo for what he did for Seo. The following day, Ryo accompanies Seo to do some shopping, then tells her that her brother asked him to take her to eat kamatan, since it's something Seo has never tried before, and Shin wanted to cook it at home. Seo says her brother is quite the glutton, but Ryo assures her that Shin just wants her to try it, being a good brother, so Seo agrees. Later, a vendor stops them to offer her accessories, thinking they were a couple. Despite clarifying the misunderstanding, Ryo decides to gift Seo something, and ends up buying her a valuable flower pattern kanzashi for her hair. Seo blushes when the vendor whispers to her not to let go of a guy like Ryo, as she would likely have a lot of competition. Shortly after, Seo and Ryo continue on their way, but hear a commotion, as some thugs try to kidnap a young woman in the capital. Ryo acts quickly, knocking out the kidnapper and ending up holding the unconscious girl in his arms. The girl's protector, after knocking out another thug, approaches and apologizes to Ryo as it was all due to her incompetence. Ryo hands over the girl and tells her not to worry, and to apologize to her instead when she wakes up. Before he can say anything else, Ryo decides to leave with Seo, wanting to avoid further trouble. In no time, news spreads that a boy saved the young Komomo, reaching Gouki-saga, Inspector Hayate's father. Gouki explains to Hayate that fortunately, the boy stopped the perpetrators, but didn't hesitate to leave the scene. Setting aside the topic, Hayate hands his father a letter from Yuba, which she asked him to deliver upon seeing him in person. Upon reading the letter, Gouki is greatly surprised and trembles as he asks Hayate if he had met someone named Ryo. Shortly after, Ryo and Seo arrive at the house where everyone is currently staying. Inspector Hayate wastes no time in calling for Ryo, who joins him and his parents for a conversation. Gouki introduces himself along with his wife, Kyoko Saga, and tells Ryo that in the past, they both served Ryo's mother, Ayame Karasuki. Seeing Ryo's great surprise, Gouki explains that his mother belonged to the royal family of Karasuki. He recounts that over 20 years ago, the kingdom of Karasuki was at war with Rokuren, a neighboring kingdom. Ryo's father, Zen, who had a natural talent for spiritual and martial arts, was there as a volunteer soldier. The king soon granted Zen the title of noble warrior and tasked him with proving his skills. As his talent was genuine, Gouki recommended him as a guard for the royal family, where he was entrusted with protecting Ayame Karasuki, who soon began to be drawn to Zen. Then, during the truce negotiations with the kingdom of Rokuren at the celebration ceremony, the prince, who had attended as an ambassador, had his attendants kidnap Ayame. After Zen foiled their plans by rescuing Ayame, the prince, resentful at losing an attendant, demanded Zen's execution to finalize the truce and a politically arranged marriage with Ayame. Ryo asks Gouki if that was the reason his parents fled, and he confirms it, telling him that the king planned it all in secret. Ayame and Zen fled the country, and time passed without any news of them. Still, Gouki tells him, moved, that after reading Yuba's letter and observing Ryo's honorable demeanor, he has no doubt that he is the son of Zen and Ayame. The next day, at Gouki's request, Ryo presents himself at the royal castle to meet the kings. He meets King Hamura and Queen Shizuku, who are easily surprised when they finally see their grandson. Ryo tells them about his parents and the little time they spent together. His father died when he was too young to remember him, and his mother was always very kind but died when he was only 5 years old. His grandparents are surprised to hear this and ask Ryo how she died. Ryo hesitates for a few seconds, then tells them that it wouldn't be easy to hear, but his grandparents insist. Ryo tells them that his mother was killed in front of his eyes by a man named Lucius, who apparently worked with his father as an adventurer. He explains that Lucius had helped them a lot after his father's death, but one day, his mother left him alone at home, warning him not to open the door to strangers. However, upon hearing Lucius, he let him in since he already knew him, but Lucius started attacking him and made him drink poison. His mother arrived, trying to protect him, but shortly after, Lucius stabbed her with a knife. Ryo tells them that's the last thing he remembers before he passed out back then. Devastated, his grandparents ask him what he did next, and Ryo tells them that he woke up in the slums, where he lived as an orphan for a while. He then recounted everything he experienced from the age of 7, from his journey at the Beltram Academy to the moment he arrived in Yagumo. Ryo tells them that he still seeks revenge, as it would be the one thing he could never forgive. The king says he won't stop him but asks him to first fight Gouki, the best warrior of Karasuki. This is to ensure that he is strong enough to defeat Lucius, who probably, being so strong, could have also killed Zen. Ryo agrees, and as he steps out into the courtyard to fight Gouki, he encounters the young woman he previously saved in the capital. Her protector, AI, recognizes him, surprised, and exclaims that the boy accompanying them was the one who saved Komomo, Gouki and Kyoko's daughter. After such a surprise, the duel between Ryo and Gouki begins, with Gouki amazed at Ryo's skill. The duel becomes more difficult and serious as both start using spiritual arts, but in a swift attack, Ryo manages to win the duel. Everyone is utterly amazed. The kings tell Ryo that he is more than prepared, and they wish him a safe journey. Days later, Ryo returns to the village and tells his cousin Ruri about his lineage. Closer to his family, Ryo lives in the village for a year, during which time he learns that Seo is in love with him, but he tells her he cannot reciprocate. Nevertheless, they part on good terms, and after bidding farewell to everyone, Ryo finally leaves the village, promising to return someday. Before returning to Beltram, Rio decides to visit Latifah, returning to her house to stay for a few months. However, a few days later, Rio wakes up screaming in his house, noticing that an unknown girl was sleeping in his bed, naked. The girls living in Rio's house are scandalized when they enter his room and see such a scene. But Rio is as confused as they are. When he asks the girl who she is, she calls him Haruto and explains that she is the spirit with whom he made a pact. The girl asks him to give her a name, and Rio, upon seeing her, somehow remembers Miharu but decides to call her Aishia. Rio takes her to the Council of Elders as the girl did not retain her memories and did not know what to do. Dryas appears, saying it's unusual for Aishia to not remember anything but asks her in which element she specializes in spiritual arts. Aishia responds that she specializes in all of them, which surprises Dryas and the Elders greatly. According to Dryas, a humanoid spirit that masters all elements is unheard of, so they need to find out how strong Aishia is. Therefore, shortly after, Aishia and Rio engage in a grand duel, but they are soon stopped by Dryas. Seeing the intensity of the fight, Dryas says it could have put the village in danger if it had continued. Nevertheless, they confirm that Aishia does indeed master all the elements, and despite this, Dryas says she barely showed a fraction of her power. Dryas then decides she will teach Aishia everything about spirits, and the elders welcome her to the village, which Rio appreciates. Months later, one of the elders finishes building a special house that Rio could store in his space-temporal deposit. That day, Rio talks to Latifah about his past life and discovers that she was the same girl who was in the bus accident. They both reveal their real names and strengthen their bond as siblings, which comforts Latifah, who is sad about Rio's imminent departure. The next day, Rio is already prepared to leave, but not before receiving a valuable teleportation crystal from Ursula, a crystal that is configured to bring him back to the village at any time, so he can return more easily. They explain that it only works one way, so he cannot use it to return to the starting point, but it would still be very useful. Another elder gives him an earring that will allow Rio to change the color of his hair so that the authorities won't recognize him. Rio thanks everyone for the gifts and leaves with Aishia, who already had enough knowledge about spirits, thanks to Dryas. 2 years later, in the royal capital of Beltram, Rio is surprised to see so many people, so after changing the color of his hair, he decides to ask a local about it. He is informed that it's because the next day, there will be the grand wedding of a noble from the house of Duke Arbo. Rio doesn't ask further and decides to head to the academy with Aishia, only to find that Celia's office is completely empty. Using spiritual magic, Aishia manages to get someone from the academy to give them the information they need. Rio discovers that the person marrying the noble the next day is Celia Claire, but much to Rio's surprise, he discovers that Celia was going to marry Charles Arbo. They explain that it will be a marriage of convenience since during the last conflict, the Proxia Empire defeated the Kingdom of Beltram decisively. This was thanks to the actions of the Arbo house, and although they barely managed to initiate peace negotiations, the royal family lost all its authority. When the faction of Duke Huguenot was blamed, they had to leave the capital. So the Arbo house took the opportunity and decided to join forces with the Clare house to regain strength. Not knowing if it's something the Clare house truly wanted, Rio decides it's best to ask Celia in person. Aishia tells him that she will evade the castle's magic detection mechanisms to locate Celia. Shortly afterward, he finds her, and Rio infiltrates the castle for an emotional reunion with Celia, who cries tears of happiness upon seeing him after 4 long years. However, when Rio asks her about the wedding, Celia becomes evasive and lies to him, saying it's something she decided herself. She then thanks Rio for visiting her before her wedding but asks him to leave. Rio has no choice but to leave the castle after her insistence, but with Aishia's help, he decides to investigate the true reasons for the wedding. The next day, the wedding preparations take place, and Rius arrives to congratulate Charles personally. But he stops chatting happily and becomes alert upon sensing the presence of a rather strong spirit. Charles notices his unease, but Rius tells him it's nothing and retires to the ceremony hall. Shortly after, to Celia's great surprise, Princess Christina arrives to visit her, congratulating her instead of her parents. Celia's demeanor improves slightly after talking with her, but it returns to normal when the wedding begins shortly after, making it difficult for her to maintain a smile. Aishia mentally communicates with Celia, who is in a carriage waving to the crowd, and tells her that Rio asked her to speak with her in that manner. Celia then scans the crowd and finds Rio watching. She instantly feels glad but starts crying as well, as Rio was the one person she didn't want to see her like this. Charles, who was in the carriage beside her, gets startled seeing her in such a state, then calms down thinking they were tears of joy. but tells her to compose herself. After calming down, Celia mentally asks Acia if she's still there, but she had already left. Feeling somewhat sad, Celia convinces herself that it was all an illusion and repeats to herself that she's a doll without feelings to maintain her composure. The carriage finally arrives at the palace, and Charles offers his hand to Celia, who resignedly extends her hand towards him. But before they manage to hold hands, a guard shouts, alerting everyone. Celia looks towards the commotion and manages to see Rio running straight towards her. Many guards and mages intervene, but Rio takes down each one after a command. Charles and Celia are protected by the kingdom's most advanced elite. Charles remains confident, assuring Celia that it's all just a show. But he soon eats his words when he sees Rio swiftly defeating the elite and landing a heavy blow to his chest, leaving him breathless. Charles falls to the ground, and Rio grabs Celia, putting a knife to her throat. The entire kingdom freezes. Unsure of what to do, Rio keeps Charles pinned to the ground, and he asks what he wants. Rio steps on him forcefully and orders him to shut up, exclaiming that he wants revenge and threatening to break his spine if he tries anything. He then telepathically speaks to Celia, who looks worried, and assures her that he won't kill anyone and that it's all part of the distraction. Taking advantage of the chaos, Rio telepathically speaks to Celia again, asking her once more what she wants. She tells him she already made it clear, but Rio asks her to be honest. After all, the Arbo Duke's house has the Claire house threatened. Celia says it's excessive, and Rio doesn't deny it, but after remembering his mother, he tells Celia that he won't let them take away what matters to him again. He assures her that if she lets the wedding happen, she'll face a future where her dignity would be trampled on for the rest of her life. After discussing it, convinced, Celia agrees and asks Rio to get her out of there. Later, Rio continues his performance, loudly exclaiming that he had decided to humiliate Charles by kidnapping his girlfriend. Then Rio jumps with Celia in his arms, running and disrupting all the soldier formations and blocking magical attacks. Among the palace audience, Rias watches, recognizing Rio for his skills, and noting that he's much stronger since the last time he saw him. Entertained, Rias launches a powerful magic attack out of sheer curiosity, and is surprised to see Rio manage to block it, causing a massive explosion. After witnessing Rio emerge unscathed from such an attack and flee with Celia, Rias becomes much more interested in him, and in the spirit that never showed itself. However, he doesn't manage to do more, as being sheltered by royalty as an ambassador of the Empire, it would be difficult to slip away easily. Rio manages to get far enough away from the aerial units pursuing them, so he decides to descend to the town to continue with his plan. He leaves Celia with Acia, planning to buy time for them to leave the capital. While they flee, Rio runs, defeating many guards along the way and attracting attention, just as he planned. However, Alfred Emerl, the king's sword, appears, intending to stop him. Rio faces him, noticing how strong he is, but finds it difficult to fight as he has to be careful not to kill him. Alfred notices Rio holding back, so he gets angry, thinking that Rio underestimates him. Then, Alfred unleashes a massive magic attack with his sword, which blinds everyone for a few seconds, only to later notice that Rio disappeared. Shortly after, Rio appears on the outskirts of the capital to meet with Acia and Celia, who are waiting for him worriedly. Celia is glad to see him. Rio assures her he's okay, even though his clothes are very worn out. After making sure all three are fine, they begin to plan their journey. However, Acia startles when she realizes something. After saying, "They're coming," rays of different colors start emanating from several distant mountains. When these rays extinguish, Acia reacts and asks Rio to please help them, while she takes care of Celia. Not fully understanding, Rio quickly travels. Meanwhile, somewhere in the mountains, a group of 3 Japanese students appears, unaware of their location and with no signal on their phones. Shortly after, they are kidnapped by a group of bandits, who lock them in carriages. Rio soon arrives at the scene, and upon hearing the screams of the students, who surprisingly speak Japanese, he begins to kill the bandits one by one. After dealing with all of them, he frees the 2 students who are in the carriage. They tell him that their female companion was locked up in a different place, so Rio goes to investigate. Upon checking another carriage, Rio is greatly surprised to find that the student there is Miharu Ais, leaving their reunion as the final scene in this new life. If you've reached this part of the video, comment the word magician in the comments. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this anime.